a Friday morning, right, Pete? David and Rusty. I'm so excited to talk about account-based selling today. Very excited about the key takeaways you're gonna get from the panelists. But
Mhm.
first, we will give folks a few minutes to joining us today, and we have a poll. So I'm gonna go ahead and open the poll, and folks in the audience can answer the poll. I'm going to put in the screen right now, so go ahead and answer the question. And I also have a quick icebreaker for my panelists, and people in the audience also feel free to join the icebreaker in the chat. You can answer the question in the chat. So panelists, if you could eliminate one thing from your daily routine, what would it be? Let me start with David.
Oh, sure. I get to go first. Nice. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I would say sleep for sure. If I could get away without sleeping, oh man, life would be a lot easier.
I would never pick my one. That's a bold one. What about you, Pete?
I think probably the thing that I would, if I could get away with eliminating it, would probably be like coffee. When my 5-year-old was in utero, I actually switched to Earl Grey tea, right? A little like less caffeinated as a mechanism by
Mhm.
which to think that I might be able to like use coffee as like a performance enhancing drug after like my newborn showed up, and then ever since it's just been like, I'm just like way too caffeinated. So I think that would be the one. I don't know if I'm
Coffee all day.
bold. I don't know if I'm bold enough to try it though.
Yeah, I tried once, didn't work. What about you,
Yeah.
Rusty?
Well, Pete, I've actually been off coffee for a while, so
That doesn't count. That doesn't count.
But I would say one thing I would love to eliminate from my daily routine is having to exercise. If I could just look like
Mm.
Dave and not exercise, that'd be enough. You know what I mean? That's my goal.
Yeah, Dave, that's what Traction Complete should be selling.
That's right.
Oh,
That's
man.
a good one.
Yeah.
Uh, So I'm gonna ask my audience again to go in the chat and answer the icebreaker and tell us where you're calling us from. We love to hear from you, audience. And let's get started. Today we're here to talk about the results of the 2022 Account-Based Selling Maturity Matrix Survey conducted by MSP and Traction Complete. And as I said, I'm so excited about the amazing content and the key takeaways you're gonna get from the event. But before, let me do some quick introductions. This event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for members to answer questions they would struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they might not know about. And with 27,000 members, I am sure like there were no questions unanswered and no problems unsolved in our community. And you can have all your answers, all your questions solved and answered through live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum and we have quarterly summits. And we're starting to get back into in-person events. So if you're already not part of the MSB team, you will be invited to join after this event. And as I said, we have quarterly summits and we are getting ready for an amazing summit this October. I just put a link in the chat. We have the RevX Fest coming up.
Awesome.
Um, and if you like this content, you will love our 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening October 11th through the 13th. We pull together more than 24 events of amazing content and speakers. You can hear from the CEO of Zoom Info, Gansai, Cowboy Ventures, and Winning by Design, as well as leaders at Lattice, Pendo, and Outreach, and Atrium, and much more. So click on this link, register for the summit. It's going to be amazing. But that's enough about MSP and Summit. We also have an amazing sponsor today, and our sponsor is Traction Complete. They put together that survey that a lot of people answer, and we are about to hear the details about the survey. But let's hear what Traction Complete is all about. David, would you be able to give us a quick introduction to Traction Complete?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys for having me. And Pete, thank you for putting together this amazing community. I've had the pleasure of being a member for about 6 years, I think, and I'm just so
Whoa, you're an OG. Holy
something like that. I might be
mackerel.
getting wrong, but yeah, I'm just
I
so
mean,
impressed.
that's amazing. Yeah, wow. That's super impressive.
Yeah, well, the content's amazing, right? And the attitude of everybody, sharing, contributing back, learning from one another, it's pretty impressive. So hopefully today we can contribute back ourselves. But yeah, what do? We build software that helps customers simplify the complexity of their data in Salesforce, right? I think, yeah, it's fine. Almost everyone on this call can attest that data becomes a mess, right? And it's incredibly important, more important, making data-driven decisions and whatnot. But that with dirty data, empty records that aren't linked, things become chaotic. And so we're trying to bring a little order to that chaos. We're automatically matching records, cleaning up duplicates, linking records together, and providing automation to help revenue teams execute their sales territories.
Awesome. It's so great
Love
to
it.
have Traction Complete as a sponsor, MSP sponsor. We love to have you here, Traction Complete. I'm excited to dive in, but first let's go over some housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded, so all this knowledge you can access afterwards in the MSP previous events page. And second, I was talking with the panelists backstage. They love answering questions. It's Friday. They're all tired. They want to go into the weekend, but they're like, if we can get a lot of questions in the
Fully
chat,
caffeinated.
yep. If we can get the questions in the chat, that will make my weekend way better. So please go into the Q&A right there and send them a lot of questions. We want to hear from you, audience. And finally, let's get to know our panelists. Today we have Rusty Jensen, a leader in the ABS space with us to give some best practices. Hey, Rusty, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rusty Jensen, and I'm the VP of our Global Business Account Management Organization at Conga. And just as a quick intro, I've been in software for about 15 years. I was at Nice Systems for 12 years, where I was able to kind of start as a sales developer, was selling, carried a bag, ran sales teams and regions and divisions. And I think if you stay at a company long enough, especially in software, they'll eventually promote you. But had a great opportunity there to actually build our entire account-based selling strategy at Nice Systems, running our pipeline generation for the company globally. So doing the same thing here now at Conga, and it's been a great experience, and I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for coming and thank you for being here. We also have Dave Nelson on the call. You already heard from him. He is an expert in account-based selling and data management and our partner in this ABS survey. David, why don't I hand it over to you so you can tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. And I second what Rusty said. You stay in the industry long enough and you can work your way up the chain. So I had come from software engineering background, but started working for Traction on Demand, which was a major Salesforce implementation partner. Grew to about 1,400 people. And over that time, we started to want to create products from all the intellectual property that we created over these services engagements over time.
Sure.
And so we created Traction Complete, which is kind of a spin out product company helping with account-based sales and automation and data cleanup. And we sold off the services business back in March, actually, to Salesforce themselves. So the majority of the business has moved over professional services, but that the product companies are kind of living on and growing and thriving.
Awesome, thank you. And the last star in this panel today is Pete. Pete, you are our great moderator for today. So I'm gonna tell the audience this is the last call for you to answer the poll. I'm gonna close it soon while I pass it to Pete. So Pete, please introduce yourself, and then you can kick off this amazing panel and give us all the knowledge that you have.
Killer. Thanks, Eduardo. Appreciate it. Yeah. Hey, folks. My name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve their performance, improve the performance of their teams. So that's my day job right now. Background is actually I got into sales through my last software company, TalentBin. It was a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And so when I was at TalentBin, when we started in like 2010, I was a business generalist founder, had a product management and a product marketing background. And I had to become our first seller, first sales manager, and then sales leader. And so I was just, that kind of got hip to like modern sales and kind of like operationally excellent sales and kind of analytically excellent sales in that experience. When I was acquired by Monster Worldwide, I was responsible for new product sales for 1,000 sales reps at Monster. Ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales in, geez Louise, from 2016 to 2019. And then, as Dave noted earlier, I started Modern Sales Pros in around 2016 or so. So I think do a little thinking on modern sales and kind of like sales excellence stuff. So I'm super pumped to talk about what we're going to get into here today, because I think, as Dave notes appropriately, like data kind of is the core of like account-based, like data is the core, like the core backbone of your organization's sales motion, especially as it gets bigger, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited that Rusty is here today. Because Rusty, I forget, how many ISRs and SDs do you guys have at Conga? It's like not a few. It's a lot.
So we've got about 115 right now.
Yeah, totally. So like anytime you get from like, five people in the sales organization beyond, that's like when orchestration and things starts getting kind of like crazy. So I'm excited to kind of talk about what what the insights that came out of Traction Complete's survey was today. So I think Dave, I think there were kind of like three buckets that kind of were identified in the survey. You want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll kind of get into some of the other insights?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll sit back just for a second. You guys would probably agree, account-based sales, it's really been happening for decades, right? That companies have always been doing this. It was really only labeled as account-based sales when the account-based marketing motion really took off.
Right.
And like you said, when I think about account-based selling, I think about that it all boils down to specifically going after strategic accounts, right? Choosing them based on the data, like you said, based on their propensity to buy, based on their growth, based on what they've purchased already. But really putting in those strategies and those processes for your teams to then provide the best shot to grow those accounts. And now I think is probably more important than ever to be focused on account-based sales, because with this recession coming in, people are going back in this protectionist mode. We've all seen it. People are doing layoffs. People are cutting spend. And sales teams are way more likely to sell more into accounts that they've already built the trust in than they are into selling into net new logos. And so we want to put out the survey to see, hey, where are people fitting today? Are they fully adopted in account-based selling? Are they just getting started? Because we wanted to contribute back. We wanted to see, okay, well, from the leaders, from folks like Rusty, what can those folks that fall into kind of early adopter status learn from it to progress in that maturity? How can they go from the adopters to developers who are already entrenched but still have a long way to go, and eventually get to Rusty status where you're a leader and expert in account-based selling with all those processes and stuff. And so we found these three buckets that, based on people's answers, where they put themselves really. And if you guys on the call haven't filled out the survey, you're welcome to. I think we'll drop a link in the chat to get a sense of where you sit. And then of course the follow-up is going to be suggestions and tips and tricks, and a course on how to kind of progress through there.
I love it. Cool. So let's talk about some of the different ways that or some of the different kind of capabilities that were identified in the survey, and kind of like where people kind of think that they're at there. I think these were kind of like the top things that popped out in the survey. Is that right, David?
Yeah, well, the first one was kind of, okay, well, let's get a sense of what's everyone's biggest priority. What's the number one strategy that they're focused on in their account-based selling efforts? And you could see the results. It was overwhelmingly across the board, whether you're a adopter, a developer, a leader, that everyone was focused on identifying new sales opportunities, or in this case, really kind of white space within those accounts that you've already sold to. Followed up by landing and expanding as second. But a really interesting takeaway that we found was that that's everyone's primary strategy and focus, but that only 3 in 10 felt that they were actually doing this successfully. That kind of blew me away.
Right.
I felt like the leaders would be kind of well above that, but I guess it makes sense, right? Because in account-based selling, we're talking about really growing the accounts that you have, and that becomes this big exercise. Well, you've already sold something to them. How do you identify what else you have to sell? And so I'm pumped to have Rusty here to hear from you. I'd love to get your take, Rusty, as a leader in the space, how you've done that successfully and what kind of processes and tools you guys are putting in place to really capture and grow that opportunities.
Yeah. And I think from like an opportunity growth standpoint and an expansion standpoint, whenever you have like a demand marketing model where you're kind of just putting your message out there and you're getting people to raise their hands and you're filtering down and finding accounts, it has a limit to scalability. So you have a limit to the amount of money you can invest in digital and the responses you can get. And then over time, as you kind of max out your messaging and your market potential, it starts to slow down. It starts to get a lot more difficult to scale. And so a lot of organizations really turn to account-based marketing as like a natural evolution to get to a point where it's like, look, we can't scale more in our digital strategy and our demand model. Now let's go to an account-based model. And really, the key to being able to generate pipeline in that area is your ability to really analyze data. Like Pete, you said that data really kind of is the core of this. And it's your ability to analyze data and identify your target accounts that make sense for your business. Where you've had success in the past, how do we identify our entire prospect universe of accounts first? And then how do we then take that prospect universe, prioritize those set of accounts based on the capacity we have to market to them, to prospect to them, and to engage them. And then customize content for those accounts in such a way that gets their attention more so than the general demand messaging we've been putting out there. And when you are able to identify that priority group of accounts and have a really good mechanism to prioritize them, and once you take those priorities and then you can customize content based on what you can learn about your target accounts, and then launch those campaigns and analyze results, that's really the motion in account-based selling. And when you can master that process and coordinate it across the company, that's when you're going to be able to generate a tremendous amount of pipeline. And I mean, to give you context, when we've launched some of these motions, like at NICE, to give you an example, our pipeline production from a direct perspective was 90% demand gen based. And then that became 20% of the pipeline we were creating within just a couple of years. So good account-based models actually can dwarf what you can produce just with general messaging and filtering.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that one of the things you were kind of talking about earlier, David, was like selling more to your existing customer base. And I think that, landing and expanding can both mean selling like incremental business units or incremental teams or incremental, units of demand, if you will, or it can be like incremental products into an existing customer that's maybe wall to wall already. And both of those things can end up being pretty challenging. So like as an example, here at Atrium, like our commercial model is we price on a per manager basis, because like SDR managers, AE managers, VPs of sales, et cetera, are like the primary user of Atrium. Like reps have access as well, but managers are responsible for, that's part of their job is to use metrics to improve the performance of their team. And so, making sure that you're appropriately identifying, which accounts you have used, I don't know, like 20% of the demand up in, or like 30% of the demand up in, but still have 70% or like 50% of the total opportunity still left in the account, ends up being a pretty important thing to do, because otherwise, like one of the things that we talk about internally here at Atrium is like, if you're not expanding, you're losing. And not just because there's opportunity costs there, but there's also probably like you want to penetrate accounts further and further and further in order to help not just with like your NRR, but also for a churn avoidance use case as well.
Yeah.
So
Not be
that's like
single
one
threaded.
thing that, yeah, don't be single thread. That's like an important thing for folks to consider when thinking about like how ABS works for them is like, hey, like how much juice is there left in this account to squeeze, whether it's incremental demand in that account, or it gets even like gnarlier when you have multiple products. We don't have multiple products. I know that Conga has multiple products, and that can get all the more complicated. So just making sure that your data is nice and crisp, where you're saying like, okay, cool, like here's the account, here's whatever the signifier of demand might be in the account. Like in our case, it might be like total number of sales managers, total number of XYZ. In Conga's case, maybe it might be something like total number of employees or what have you. And then being able to say how much of that demand has already been extinguished commercially, and then able to do kind of like the gap on that in order to prioritize that. And like that's just a lot of orchestration there. And if you're not doing it, there's an opportunity cost there for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. We call it the penetration reporting. See how far you penetrated, and you're exactly right. There's the ability to sell more of what you've already sold, that kind of upsell, and then the cross sell if you have multiple products. And I think the data exercise is absolutely important. And for any RevOps folks on the team, you're going to want to try and go through that exercise to surface those indicators. I like how you put that, Pete. It's indicators of what the propensity to grow. And then for sales reps, what I've seen work well is it's still an exercise. Even though the data is surfaced, you still have to go through your motions, right? You've built the trust by selling to one person. And so it's gotten easier, right? Now you can make the ask of either showing them more of what you have to sell or asking, hey, who else would these be applicable to? And can you broker me in there? And there's tools out there that can help, right? There's companies like Altify that allow you to do kind of account management and put together an account plan and a relationship map, because some of these companies are massive. And that you may make the ask to say, hey, who else is this applicable for? But they might not even know, right? Some of these groups are just too big. And so then you have to, who would know and kind of build out this map. And so there's lots of tips and tricks for both the data side and the sales side that can really help expand those efforts.
Yeah, well, let's talk about challenges a little bit more here, because I think one of the another thing that was covered in the poll survey was what were the challenges in kind of like blocking the ability to execute on account-based sales there, and like these were some of the kind of the top the top responses that came back. David, you want to take us through some of these?
Sure. Yeah. And I'd love to hear from Rusty too. The number one across the board was aligning their go-to-market team. So that was the biggest challenge of companies that they found and was limiting or hindering their account-based sales. And then the followed by different reports. We'll talk about that in a second on how it differed per segment. But Rusty, I know you've dealt with this before. How is it that you as a leader have gone about aligning those go-to-market teams that could help our listeners?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it is a very big motion for a company to execute. When you think about a demand generation model where you have sales and marketing and digital, and you have everybody that has different roles, and sales developers responding to MQLs and saying to sales, you have this entire motion of how you go to market. And when you apply an account-based selling model, it's not just a campaign in marketing. It's not just sales operations identifying a few accounts and then we're targeting a few with some outbound reps. It is actually fundamentally shifting your entire go-to-market model. You have to build an entire framework that has a different tech stack. It has different selling motions at every level. It has different marketing motions at every level. And so the first thing that's really important is to kind of lean back and look at the entire scope. How does this change and affect how salespeople sell? How does it change and affect our tactics and approaches from a sales development perspective? Once we start getting into accounts, how does it change our selling motions and the conversations we're having in accounts and our data collection? How does it change the way that we organize our account hierarchies and structures? How do we then change our marketing orchestration and the messaging and the targeting? How does the operations teams come in to actually support and augment data and help to kind of maintain a process on managing leads and contacts? And then how do we actually even coordinate even things like customer success for land and expand situations and for channel? Because in normal organizational structures, everyone operates in a linear silo. You have marketing that executes their digital campaigns. The leads then come in, sales development takes over, they prospect into it, they get a meeting, sales jumps in, they qualify, sales sells a deal, they move on, right? Customer success takes over. There's actually very little overlap and interaction. But in an account-based model, you're working the account for the long term, all the subsidiaries. You're generating heat maps of all the different products. So to get it to coordinate and to work, you have to first realize it's big. And you need all of the senior leadership leaders in the company right behind it, CEO on down, CEO, CMO, sales. And you need someone to own it as an entire strategy and then re-architect the system to operate as an entirely different tech stack. So once that happens, to make it successful, building out the processes and the coordination, right? It starts at the core with data, but it's important to build sales training and certification for sales. You're the quarterback now of this account. Here are the people that are operating in this account. Here's how you're going to coordinate. Here's where the data resides. Here's the role of your inside salesperson. Here's your role of your sales developer. Here's the role that marketing is going to play. Here are the fields that need to be updated so that marketing can engage. For current customer accounts, current customer success, this is how you indicate that an account is open and happy and ready to be engaged. This is how you indicate that they don't engage. These are the kinds of conversations that you want to have. Here's some talk tracks and training. Here's an incentive program that's associated to finding and identifying new pipeline, right? Here's the meetings that we're going to have between sales development, marketing on a regular basis, on a weekly basis to coordinate how we're engaging in these accounts, right? Here's our operational review, our QBR structure. I mean, all of that has to be built so that everyone is truly reading off the same sheet of music and working together. And it's hard because now what you're doing is you're saying we all need to work together as a team. And we're going to step on each other's toes and we're going to have a little bit of friction. But that buy-in from the top down and the whole organizational change management drive has to be executed well. Because if it's not, it'll just break down and then people will retreat back to the silos.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really important to help like facilitate that alignment is people need to know who's responsible for what, and usually what that means is like being able to report on things like these are the things that I'm responsible for, these are the things that you're responsible for, etc. And that can get like really messy when your hierarchies are messed up. That can get messy for like a variety of different reasons, right? Like it's kind of like who's on first, who's on second, etc. David, maybe you can share a little bit of like your experience with respect to like effectively reporting on like the results of account based on kind of the outcomes associated with that, and kind of like the implications of that, the implications of like messy hierarchies and kind of like account data for achieving that or not.
Yeah, for sure. And Rusty, I liked what you said, by the way. And I really like the point about kind of customer success indicating when you can go after a customer and when not to. And I think that ties in, P2, to what you're asking on in the data, right? Like you need to be able to surface that data. And when you're dealing with these big accounts, when usually they are, right? Usually when you're doing account-based selling, you're putting in all the efforts that Rusty's talking about. You've gone to the leadership to get alignment. You're putting dollars behind the marketing spend and whatnot. You're not going after a small mom and pop shop, right? You're going after one of these big accounts. And the struggle that I think Pete's getting at is all the CRMs do a really good job of reporting on an individual record, right? What have you sold? What haven't you? How much is the spend? How much did you grow this year? Where it breaks down is when you're selling into a massive conglomerate and they have multiple records, right? There's either the sales reps have created 2 accounts, one for marketing, one for sales, different divisions, which isn't necessarily best practice, but it happens all the time. And then there's also the situation where there are multiple accounts. There's subsidiaries, there's mergers and acquisitions, there's different divisions like aerospace versus healthcare kind of thing. That's where it gets difficult to report. And so that's where it's important to have that data cleaned up and linked together. And I think that's actually one of the questions in the survey that we'll touch on in a sec. But that reporting becomes critical, because like you said, Pete, and the measuring, in order to get better, you got to measure how well you did, right? Okay, well, how effective were we? So that now we can look to see, okay, well, can we improve that? Get the benchmark so you can layer up after that. Yeah, and so there's a whole bunch that you can do for linking those accounts together, being able to do the roll-up reporting, and we'll actually touch on that in a second, I think. But one of the
I think
yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, we're gonna say before we talk about that.
Oh yeah, it was super interesting. So we talked. The number one challenge was aligning teams, and Rusty nailed it there with what you need to do in order to do that. What we found was when you break down this categories, the early adopters, the developers, and the leaders, the number one issue or challenge was aligning teams. The number two challenge was different across that. So it really went to show like their how they were progressing through maturity. And I know that for the early adopters, it was exactly what Rusty said, that they had trouble trying to get leadership buy-in into putting the money and the effort into this whole account-based strategy. And then once you've done that and you've crossed that hurdle, then the priorities change and the challenges change, right? Then I think developers ran into resourcing. Okay, well, they bought into it, but we still haven't really put the money behind it to get the people and the power to go about it. Whereas then when you're a leader, you've got the people and the power, and that's with the data. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Pete. The data becomes the issue, because now you have all sorts of people creating content, creating records, leads, ops, and that's where that issue comes. And then they want to start reporting on it. So you hit the nail on the head.
Well, let's talk about like how to, like, one major mechanism by which to solve this, I think, is this notion of a revenue operations function. Like if there is going to be chaos without somebody who's responsible for reducing chaos or bringing order to the chaos, then maybe we should probably have somebody who wears the chaos killer crown. And so let's kind of talk about that a little bit here, because it seems like a lot of the folks who are just kind of like starting out don't really have that function in place. But the people who are doing a good job, they do have that function in place. So David, maybe you can touch on kind of like the deltas that that the survey illuminated there.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense, right? When you're early, you just don't have the budget to hire another role, and so people are playing that function off the side of their desk if they're in sales ops or marketing ops or trying to coordinate it. But like Rusty was saying, when you're trying to get the entire team aligned in one direction, you probably need to have one person that's coordinating all those efforts, that's working on the operations to give that one North Star to point towards, right? And all those metrics that you were talking about for lining in that same direction. But Pete, I'd almost throw that back to you, because you've built this amazing community and there's a ton of RevOps folks in here. How have you seen that done well across businesses?
Yeah, I think it really kind of depends on the maturity stage of the organization. I think there's like a little bit of like nomenclature confusion sometimes with folks, where it's like, is there somebody in your organization who in general is responsible for maintaining the database? Because like a database is like a shared source of truth and reality that other people can orchestrate off of and like kind of like index off of. It's like a shared, like, shared store of state there. Oftentimes there is someone there that their title just happens to be sales operations, right? Because like sales operations has been around for a long time. The thing to kind of think about what that person does though is, maybe historically they've been perceived as that their kind of purview is fairly narrow. Like they are responsible for maintaining, the database for sales, right? And like the orchestrations associated with that, whether that's like, opportunity validation rules, or like assignments, or maybe like territorying and like compensation and right? And so I think that like oftentimes, like if an organization has a sales operations person in place, that doesn't mean that they don't like have a reps person. It just means that like maybe there's an opportunity for them to like expand scope a little bit. one of my favorite kind of metaphors for like more modern sales is like Winning by Designs talks about this. Jocko van der Kooi and Dominique Levin, they talk about, instead of it being a funnel, it's a bow tie, right? Where like, demand comes in the front, you have a transaction, and then like success happens out the back end. And so the one way to kind of think about that, like the sales operations person can expand their peer view out like this. So it's like, hey, I'm not just supporting the opportunity and kind of the execution of the opportunity and the initial transaction of it. We are also supporting like how demand gets into the the funnel there, and then also how success happens, not just for the purposes of success, which is also like obviously really important, but also for all those incremental sales opportunities that we were talking about, like expanding more incremental products, et cetera, et cetera. So when organizations are smaller, just like if you have a sales operations person, you have a revenue operations person already. You just maybe haven't like given them the the stamp of approval to expand their purview. If you don't have somebody who's responsible for bringing order to chaos, and you're at like 10 plus reps or like 20 plus reps, well, that's like a whole different story. And like that, I think that you're just kind of gonna get eaten alive by by like not just like technical debt in your database, but also just on a recurring basis, there'll just be like insufficient coordination, so your teams won't be operating at the levels that they need. So like that, I mean, those are kind of the organizations that we work with. Is like at Atrium, we work with organizations that have like 10, 40, 80, 100 reps, 200 reps, things like that. Rusty, obviously you've worked at organizations that are much larger than that. How do you see revenue operations kind of impacting those larger organizations and larger sales orgs?
When it's done really well, it's critical, especially when it comes to
Mhm.
the financial bottom line. Your revenue operations people, sometimes you tend to view them as maybe overhead. It's like additional cost. If I can just put more heads in sales, it's going to lead to more productivity. But good revenue operations process can give you incredible leverage when it comes to productivity in sales and just productivity in just labor efficiency. There's a tendency in a lot of organizations to kind of just say, hey, you're the sales guy, you can figure it out. And to load them with all kinds of administrative tasks in terms of process, like this is how you go find your contacts, this is how you go find your accounts. I want you to coordinate with everybody, just work it out between each other. You would be shocked at how many thousands of hours are wasted when a really good revenue operations process hasn't been executed. And you imagine the impact on revenue. At Congo, we've got some statistics. We actually have found that about 20% of the salespeople we work with, of the salespeople we work with, only about 20% of their time is spent selling. The rest of the time, they're chasing paper. They're managing administrative stuff. Good revenue operations knows how to tee up a salesperson and just make it easy for them to function and give them everything they need as easy as possible. You kind of got to spoon feed them, but you get productivity. and the revenue impact is massive. It's massive.
Yeah. David, is there anything you wanted to add to that because I know that one of your primary buyers is revenue operations. They're kind of like, ways that organizations can unlock that opportunity for their for their sales teams, kind of that optimization and reduced friction that Rusty was noting earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fascinating stat, Rusty, about 20%. That's shocking. And, running sales teams, like, oh my goodness, can you imagine if you had 80% more time selling? RevOps is critical. And you're exactly right, Pete. Some are labeled sales ops, some are marketing ops, but it's all focused on revenue. And that things that we've seen done well in that revenue function is, the data exercise is making sure that everything is super clear. I like how Rusty put it, kind of spoon fed. If everything is available at a glance to your sales reps, they won't have to spend the time digging. And our team calls it Salesforce Googling. So searching through Salesforce for relevant information. And some reps just don't do it, right? They're super confident in what they know, and they go for it without kind of hunting for the background. And so if you can surface that information, you're going to save awkward situations with customers, because they'll recognize what they've bought in the past, what they haven't. You'll avoid territory conflicts. And Rusty, I'm guessing part of that 80% of the time is complaining about or searching to see if this is actually part of their territory.
Oh, it's huge.
that's a major part of what I think RevOps can bring to the table there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think data, Pete, is probably one of the next things on that survey that we'll cover. Where it was kind of,
maybe the wrong. Where's the wrong thing? Here we go. Yeah, I hit the wrong slide.
no worries. Yeah. It wasn't surprising, but the numbers shocked me more than anything. I thought it'd be a little better than this, but only 2 in 10 people strongly agree that their CRM has clean and actionable account data for selling. So I knew it was bad, but I didn't think it was that bad. Adopters say only 1 in 10 feel strongly that they have clean data. Even the leaders only feel 3 in 10. And yeah, it makes sense when more and more people are filling that database, like you said, Pete. It causes bad data. The usual perpetrators are manual entry, right? Where they either don't fill in all the information that they need to, or that they create duplicates without looking, or it's list uploads from like trade shows and whatnot, that it just causes a whole bunch of duplicates, or it's integrations. The integrations from third-party systems are pumping data in. And so there's definitely strategies that companies can put in place to try and stop the bleeding there. Data governance is one for the manual side, to have a formalized process on when to create records or not. List uploads, same thing. Usually it's marketing that's updating those, but to have tools in place to make sure that it's checking for duplicates first. And then integrations and working with other systems like MuleSoft and whatnot to make sure that you're piping it in properly. But that's kind of to stop the bleeding. Right. There's also the exercise of going in and cleaning up the mess that was in there. And part of the reason this makes sense to me is that there's not many people out there that like cleaning up. Right. We already know the number one priority of organizations was to go after new revenue. Right. And going after new revenue creates more data. Right. You're creating more leads, more contacts, more accounts, more ops. And so it just adds to the mess, and nobody wants to be that cleanup. But one of the analogies our SDR leader, BDR leader likes to use is it's like brushing your teeth versus going to the dentist, right?
Sure.
People don't typically love going to the dentist, but it's important. You want to go get that regular full cleanup so that you're more efficient going forward. So you're not going to run into the kind of those bottlenecks. Yeah, Rusty, have you seen that? Have you run into those problems from the sales side?
Absolutely. I mean, you use the dentist analogy. I mean, we've been through a couple of root canals, to try to fix it. No, I mean, let me just say, I think the number one mistake that everybody makes to try to just manage their database is to think that, and it seems reasonable at first because you think of a CRM, is to think that your CRM can become the perfect database for you. In reality, trying to rely on your sales organization and all the different people that are inputting manually into the system to actually accurately create a hierarchy of accounts and accurate data is actually a very unreasonable request. And it's a very time-consuming request that will never materialize to what you want. So I would say the number one mistake people make is to assume that your sales team and other people are going to keep this really clean, maintained database. If they would just do it, really what you should be doing is relying on an external data source that's already professionally maintained. And I'm not, sitting here trying to sell Dave's product, but Traction Hierarchies is incredible in terms of tying a hierarchy in Salesforce, associating your account structures, and tying to an external database to maintain some sanity in your Salesforce. And I think that's point one. And then having operations teams come back and then supplement as much of the data integrity as they possibly can using a great tech stack of tools. I think you've got to do that versus trying to rely on your sales team to do that. And then when your sales team just needs to do little tweaks, little augments, provide a little extra context, load in a little bit of manual data as they have conversations, that's fantastic as long as the framework is there. But do not try to do it yourself. Don't assume you can. You will lose millions of dollars trying to do that. Just work on the external side, right? Work with your RevOps teams to get a really good database architecture first and use that external strength to help you.
Yeah, and I think that precipitates even more when you have like larger accounts. at Atrium, we primarily sell into like SMB and mid-market organizations. We're not in, super large accounts just yet, but like the bigger the accounts get, the weirder, the weirder they get, the more subsidiaries
Sure.
they have, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that like this notion of how to use, like how to name accounts and assign them as opposed to geography, right? Like, how to assign people the accounts that they ought to be going after. I was actually talking with one of Atrium's customers about this the other day, about like appropriate ways of going about this. But instead naming accounts and giving giving people their plate of things to go after versus just being like, yeah, anything in this geography over here, anything like that's in this company's band over here is open season there. Dave, you want to kind of talk us through kind of this insight here and this takeaway?
Sure. Yeah. I think the survey highlighted that the leaders in account-based selling were really adopting that strategic account or named account territories, meaning that they were specifically picking the accounts for the sales teams and saying, hey, this is your closed book of business. These are the accounts that we want you to go in and sell to. Whereas the early adopters haven't got to that stage. They're working more on that geography style that you were just talking about, Pete. And that when they get to that focus of these are the accounts that you can sell to, that's where account-based selling really hits home, right? You only have one account for strategic reps, or you only have 5 or 10 for the enterprise reps to go after. And that's where all of this becomes necessary, but also the stakes become higher because some of these sales reps, their quotas are like $20 million a year that they have to sell, and even higher at some like Salesforce, there can be hundreds of millions. That's where this coordinated effort, the surfacing of the data becomes necessary, and having that clean, actionable data is incredibly important. Rusty, you guys probably have the full gamut of territories from strategic to enterprise. Have you seen that done well? Did you see it change your effectiveness at all when you moved to those targeted accounts?
Absolutely. And, it really is, when we're kind of setting up territories, is a combination of geographies and also segment slices, based on size accounts and also potentially verticals. And so, what you're doing is you take a particular geography and then you have kind of a velocity or growth team. You have like a commercial mid-market team, an enterprise, and a strategic team that can function in a particular area. Most strategic accounts are not necessarily geographic. They're more named. But, a lot of times as you grow, you kind of start with geography. It's east and west of the Mississippi, right?
Right.
And then as it starts to build and grow, then you kind of break them up in little territories, and then it starts getting almost untenable. Then you start slicing. Here's our SMB. Here's our commercial. Here's our enterprise. And then you start putting verticals inside. You start slicing in verticals. You carve out teams. And when you're really good at this account-based selling approach, I've never in my career cut territories down and not seen productivity increase per rep. And you talk about people with $20 million quotas. Those are real thin little territories, and focus. When you focus down on accounts right, and you've got the right approach, you're going to increase productivity. Right.
We found the exact same thing we did with our services business. When we started to give people targeted focused accounts, smaller territories, they started selling more, which shocked us, right? We thought, well, you no longer have this massive patch. But yeah, we found the same.
Well, I think the reason why, and I think this kind of goes to like how to intentionally go about that, is like, and to kind of Rusty's point earlier about like making it easy for reps. If you have a known good set of accounts and you've done the work to identify the external signifiers of demand in those accounts, like I'll give you an example, like with Atrium, right? Like the externally like observable signifier of demand in an account for us would be the number of like sales managers, which would be correlated to the number of sales reps, right? And so this is an externally available, stat that you can find. You go on LinkedIn, you could use like, a lot of data providers, not necessarily ones that are only like contact objects, right? But like ones that kind of give you understandings of like what a department might look like. So then if you have that, you can then say, hey, here, Dave, you're one of my reps. here are 100 accounts that I know have anywhere between like, 50 to 200 reps in him. So here you go. This is your named territory. I know that everything in here is legit, is a sick op, right? You should go after it. Versus, here you go. I'm going to throw you into Northern California, or I'm going to throw you into this territory over here, and you should just go ahead and see if you can kind of sniff things out there. So doing that, like that lift, that territorying, right? Like identify, and it's almost like we need like a better word than territory, because it's like left over in this like vestige of geography, right? Like a territory is actually like ground versus like a patch, which unfortunately is also like still like we need some sort. It's like that's why I like the word plate, right? Like here's your plate that you have that so it's not surprising that if you give somebody a full plate that is like that doesn't have like a bunch of rocks and like twigs and whatever in there mixed in with like the food, that they're going to be able to be more effective in how they go about things. And I think that like kind of the crux of that is having a good data approach, having good external data providers, and then also having someone who's responsible for kind of that territorying behavior, like filling the plate, and then also just making it very easy to awkwardly extend the metaphor, but make sure that people that here's your plate, and also here's your fork, and like here's your knife next to it, just like making it as easy as possible so they can just like get to work. I think that that's like a very key thing there. So
I like that
I know we
analogy.
have
I like that a lot.
yeah yeah, I know that we have we got about 10 minutes left here, so I want to make sure that we kind of cover all the things that we need to here. I think one big thing that's kind of related to this, the like strategic accounts, kind of like named accounts situation, is as you get all these larger organizations, if you don't have crisp connections between larger organizations and kind of their subsidiaries, then things can kind of get weird in a hurry there. Dave, maybe you can kind of like give us a little bit of context on how the best organizations go about this, and kind of like the challenges associated with not solving this.
Yeah, sounds good. And I mean, it's very much related to that territory, that plate you talked about, P, where if you've given a sales rep 1, 2, 3, 4 accounts to sell to, but you've given them a $20 million quota, they got a lot of work to do, right? And so their only opportunity to sell is to be able to recognize where in this major account are the opportunities to sell into. And it's not surprising that only 2 in 10 companies feel like they're doing this well, because it's complicated, right? It's really tough without an external data provider. I think both of you guys mentioned, to recognize when a company like ABC is actually part of Walt Disney, or ESPN for that matter. You need that external data provider to give you that understanding. And if you do that, if you go through the exercise to actually link those together, you're going to fill that plate, to riff on your analogy, Pete. Because now they'll be much more efficient in going after it. But what ends up happening is that people try to dabble at it. They'll link a couple by hand. There's no way you can get through hundreds of thousands of records manually, right? It would take you years of work. And by the time you finished it, it'll all be out of date anyway. So you want to, what we see the experts doing is automating it, linking those together, providing that visibility to your sales reps so you can recognize the plate that you have to eat from. Yeah, and that you can use tools like ours, obviously, but that you need that external data provider like a Dun & Bradstreet to provide that map to go after. But that once that's done, your sales reps can be so much more efficient, and not just because they recognize the food they have to eat, but because you can avoid those territory conflicts. Because now you don't have a second rep going after ESPN and a third one going after ABC. And then by the time they get to transaction, it's all one procurement team. They all recognize it's the territory conflict. Exactly. And they all
at exactly the worst time.
Yeah, exactly.
Rusty, how have you guys how have you tackled this previously when in your various sales teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we can tie it to a question that Jackie was asking too about how we manage these accounts and how we heat map them. But basically the way we take it is we assign territories based on a global ultimate parent. And by taking the global ultimate parent and then being able to see all of the subsidiaries tied and being able to associate that using data like we use, for example, 6 Sense. So or maybe demand based, right? You use information that can show you intent signals and fit scores with how well they fit your account. So by taking those parent global ultimate parents plus all the subsidiaries and then kind of organizing them to where you have a really good balance of fit toward your target, you can set up territories in that way. And then we'll structure the territories where we'll name a territory or a field with a specific name, but then there's always a sales rep tied to the territory, but the territory governs. So basically, if a sales rep comes in and out, the territory always stays. And so you have sales developers, channel people, others that are assigned in, okay? So once you've organized all your accounts and every time you engage, you're identifying subsidiaries, but also just buying units. So you'll set up a subsidiary account for anybody who is an independent entity within the organization or division that is a buying unit. And so you use your sales developers, your sales reps, your AEs, et cetera, to kind of identify the different buying units. And then once you've identified a buying unit, you then have a heat map. And the heat map is all the technology we sell. What do they have for the technology we sell? And then all the technology that's mission critical and interconnected with our technology, what are those? What's your CRM? What's your ERP? We want to identify that information for each buying unit. So by looking at that information and seeing what the technologies are and what the buying units are and what they have in terms of what we're selling and what they have as ancillary technology, it actually sets you up to be able to coordinate effort. So we're going to go in and prospect into this entity. We're going to find out this new information. We're going to populate it as we go. We're going to find out what potential channel partners are already in those accounts with existing relationships. We're going to leverage those relationships to get introductions. And we're going to go real deep in those accounts. So essentially, that's how we've structured it. And traction is a core aspect of that. That kind of gives us the foundational architecture. And then the rest of it is a guided organization of how we pursue accounts. Make sense?
Seems very advanced. You guys are in the leader bucket there. Given that we're coming up on time here, David, were there any kind of like key takeaways you wanted to kind of share with folks? And then I know that we have like a couple of questions to address here, so maybe really briefly some kind of key takeaways.
Yeah, well, I mean, I learned a bunch from you guys. I loved Rusty's suggestions of the customer success team flagging like when and when not to talk to customers. I loved your analogy, Pete, about the plate and kind of getting rid of the rocks and the dirt and whatnot to focus on. And that really comes down to having a great operations team, whether it's labeled as RevOps or not, going through those data exercises of cleaning up and servicing it to the folks, but then also having the buy-in that Rusty talked about from the organization, because you are going to spend, but that if you do and you target it, the results are pretty dramatic, that when you focus on specific accounts, your actual efficiency and your profits end up going way up. So those are my kind of big takeaways. Yeah. How about you guys?
Rusty?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the conversation around the importance of revenue operations and having a team that can kind of guide this whole process. It's critical. And the ROI you get from it is extreme.
Yeah, you got to have someone whose job it is. Always the case, right? Someone's got to have a job.
Your job.
If it's nobody's job, if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So kind of some of the quick questions we had here. There was a question on the lead versus contact thing that Alan brought up earlier. What's the best way that we've seen to track important marketing interactions, need sales follow-up, et cetera, but on existing contacts, right? Like, so rather than using the lead object as like a to-do itself, but we've got a contact that's already been converted or is on an account or whatever, how do we instantiate, an either a to-do against that or also record kind of those interactions? David, maybe, I mean, obviously you have lots of customers who contend with this. Maybe you can share some best practices around how to do that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to how the data came in, and I'll try and rush here, guys, because I know we're just about out of time. If the data comes in as a lead, you want to convert it automatically to that existing contact, right? So you want to go through that exercise of mapping it, and then you want to communicate, right? Messaging people, letting them know through email or Slack, whatnot, that this has happened, that you need to go follow up. Creating an activity record on there too is a great one, because like you said, Pete, if it's everyone's job, it's no one's job. If you give it to someone specifically, if you assign it to somebody, then you're holding their feet to the fire of actually going and following up on it. That's what I'd say. And there's tools out there, Alan, that we're happy to talk to you about afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's like one thing that oftentimes people get confused. Like you can create a new lead and then auto convert it, and then like all of like the lead source, the campaign information, et cetera, all of that can then update to the contact or any sort of opportunity that comes out of it, and so on and so forth. And then there's all sorts of like ways that you can orchestrate, like create a to-do, which is like an open task or what have you. And then as Dave notes, like make sure to communicate it, right? Wonderful, gentlemen. Well, we're out of time. I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend. Eduardo, is there anything that we need to cover?
Hi, Kenyon. Yes.
Hi.
We're gonna wrap things up here. Thank you so much for the content. Thank you, Alan. Let me see all the names. Alan, Jackie, Dan, and Kate for your questions. If you have any more questions, Traction Complete and MSP have you covered. We have a content track all about account your hierarchies. I just drop a link in the chat. You can go and check. We love having you here, audience. You were a great audience for us today. Thank you for our wonderful Traction Complete for sponsoring this event. And thank you, David, Rusty, and Pete for all the knowledge you share with us. The recording and key takeaways will be available pretty soon in the MSP previous events page. And you will also receive a follow-up email with a direct link for the website. So thank you all. I'll see you in the next event. And the panelists and I will hang out backstage for now. So I'll see you, audience. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Eduardo.
thanks for joining us, guys.
Bye.